Each week, the Low Capacity Leader podcast goes beyond the Sunday sermon to explore the biblical insights, practical applications, and behind-the-scenes conversations that don't always fit into a weekend message. Hosted by the pastors at Fairforest Church of God in Spartanburg, South Carolina, we believe God often does His greatest work through leaders who recognize their limitations. Thanks so much for spending a few minutes with us. Low Capacity Leader Podcast, Episode 4. This is not the first time that we started this episode. Started a few minutes ago, but things went awry. I'll say it that way. Much like Sunday. Sunday did not go as planned in a few ways, and so I actually didn't get to finish the sermon. I didn't even get into the main meat of the sermon, but I did get to preach for about 10 minutes before things sort of turned, and that was okay, and God worked, and God was there, and God was present, and that was all great. But so what we got is maybe a shorter episode today, but just kind of working from Genesis 13, and honestly, this is just what happens. If you're a pastor, you know things don't always go like you think they're going to go on Sunday, and you sort of just move with it. God is still sovereign in the middle of things that don't go according to plan. And I think that's the beauty of it. So on Monday, there's no beating yourself up. There's no like, how should I have handled that better? You just go with the ghost and let it be what it is. And so, but we're going to talk about kind of what actually happened in the course of the first 10 or 15 minutes of the sermon on Sunday, and then we'll have more next week. So I'm going to pass it over to Amber.
So, because as ones who are probably watching our pastors and leaders for the low capacity, Pastor Kris did really good in navigating of how God moves in different ways. Like at the beginning, the Holy Spirit had a different agenda, and then once he got into the sermon, he did really well trying to navigate and figure out where to land. And in Genesis 13 with 5 through 18, I think is where you covered. We really kind of dove in on Lot.
Yep.
Like that's where this sermon is going. And if you come Sunday, like that's where he's going, is diving in with Lot and his story and really just living in the shadow of Abraham. And so I think that you did really well in trying to at least give like a foundation of what that means of Lot being in the shadow of Abraham.
Well, 13 does so. It says it a couple of times in chapter 12 and in chapter 13. It talks about how Lot went with Abram.
Yeah.
That's been all we've really known of him outside of the fact that Lot was the nephew of Abram. He was the son of Abram's deceased brother Haran. And so outside of that, though, we don't know much about him. But I think what I wanted to get into at least a little bit, and I will admittedly, I've got pages of notes, thousands of words of stuff, but I think there is always a challenge. Like, how do I enter into a story in a way that compels people who might not have heard where we were before, and how do you begin that in an engaging way? Because there's certain ways that you speak, there's certain tools in the tool belt to try and bring people into where you are, and I think that's one of the challenges. Like, I mean, you speak and you teach, like as well, like you can stand there, and I know like the hours of study, of preparation, of reading, of prayer, but nobody else did that with me.
Yeah,
and
nobody else sees that part.
So figuring out how do I open a big door at the beginning, and I don't always do that well, but I mean, I think that was my struggle on Sunday, and so, just trying to begin by saying that, and I think where it started was this idea that revelation emerges in places of conflict and in comparison.
Yeah.
So I really think Genesis 13 is telling us a story about Abram by telling us who Lot was, so that we don't just see Abram anymore. We see them held up together.
Yeah.
We see them in comparison, but that comparison is created by conflict.
You see the life story. You don't just see, here's a little children's church story. You see a life story of a family. Yeah. And in family, you have conflict and you have very different personalities. And how did you all come from the same pile of dirt?
Yeah,
you know?
right, yeah. Well, everybody's good. Like, Uncle Jed was a great guy until he, fist fought his brother at Thanksgiving dinner. Like that. Like it's one of those things where conflict does create an exposure. Like you see things you had not seen before, and so I do think that's a huge part of this passage, because again, we see Lot, and I think there's so many beautiful things and powerful things we can see in Lot's life, but also we start to see Abram in a way by the end of the chapter, which I obviously did not get to, but by the end of the chapter that I think really galvanizes our understanding of the father of faith, of the guy that God called to be the progenitor of the Messiah. So like that's a huge deal, but it all starts with that conflict.
Yeah, for sure. You had said something about what happens in your shadow will determine your focus or your gaze. And so really, because you were talking about Lot walking with Abraham, like we're talking about this story, how they moved. Lot continually went with Abraham. You had said, how he went with him to Egypt. He went with him back to Canaan. He went with him back to Egypt the second time, right? Yeah. And then he, and you mentioned how Lot continually went with Abraham, but then there was this point where he's like, I'm kind of done. So, but you had mentioned how, like, when you're walking in the shadow of others, like, number one, what's your shadow casting? Yeah. And then number two, if you're the one that's in the shadow of others, what are you gleaning from that shadow? Yeah. And it was really cool how you pulled out that Lot walked in the shadow of one who was chasing God. So what he gleaned is different from walking in a shadow of ones who don't chase God.
Yeah. There's the old example of the 3 chairs, and most, if you've been in church very long, you know that like the first generation can pursue God, the second generation sort of carries the first generation's pursuit by the third generation. If the second generation has not adopted that passion on their own, the third generation basically falls away. Like you're always one gap generation away from losing whatever it is that the first generation has been passionate for. And I think there is this. So in the shadow, and I did talk about it, I think it's important that what parents and grandparents and guardians and pastors and leaders and anybody who is responsible for anybody else, what you're chasing will create an ecosystem of pursuit. And so where Abram is following God, even though he goes to Egypt, right? Even though all that stuff happens is disobedience, but where Abram is following God, it creates a shadow of blessing and prosperity all around him. So we know nothing about Lot's character until these verses in chapter 13 of Genesis, but we know that Lot is prosperous because he's been following Abram. Yeah. And I did want to make the case. I think it's important because, again, when we're standing in front of, and when you're looking at people out in a congregation or in a room, like, if especially if you're not just visiting, like, the stories, their kids, their grandkids, what they were diagnosed with a year and a half ago. And I think it matters to kind of not thumb press people, but to encourage them and say, like, your pursuit of God is creating an atmosphere around you that can bless those people who are coming after you, even if they're not where you are yet. Yeah. And sure. I do think there's great encouragement there. On the other side of that, what you said is also true. At some point, though, we want to be Abram and pursue God passionately so we can create that shadow of blessing that people can come along underneath our influence. There's also a moment where everybody becomes Lot. Yes. And everybody becoming Lot means there comes a moment when you have to step out of that shadow, and you'll find out what you gleaned from that shadow when you come out from underneath it. When the light is on you, when the spotlight is on you. So like anybody who stood on the stage knows, like all the practice, all the conversations, all the preparation, that's all great. But once they turn the mic over to you and you're standing there staring at people and it's time, you're either going to fight or walk. Like that's when you find out what it is that's actually inside of you. Lot is exposed in this passage. And I think a lot of times the church is a place where you get both of those. Yeah, you get those good leaders who are creating blessing in their shadow, and then you're also in an ecosystem where people are coming out of that shadow, and you find out what they've actually absorbed, what they haven't absorbed. Mm-hmm. If the blessing is their pursuit or if the presence is their pursuit, like all of those things emerge in those moments.
I had said something to Cohen yesterday. I don't know if it was in a book I was reading. Maybe it was in a sermon I was listening to of yours. It was somewhere godly that I was listening to or
Thank
reading.
You for that. Appreciate that.
But Ed said, like, when you were born, you look like your parents.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Was it you that said it? Yeah. And when you're born, you look like your parents, but when you die, you look like your choices. Mm-hmm. And I think that has a lot to do. Is that in the rest of your sermon? Was that in your recording?
Yeah. That'll come this coming Sunday. So that's a preview of what's coming this Sunday.
I forgot, but I think it flows with that of, my bad, I'm so sorry.
No, you're good. Crawford Lawrence. It's a quote by Crawford Lawrence. Yeah.
But I said it to Cohen yesterday because he was talking about one of his classes, and he has a friend in there, hasn't really been a friend like of hanging out, but he knows him from one of his elementary grades.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, this kid gets in trouble all the time. And I was like, maybe you shouldn't be near him. And he was like, well, the teachers actually already moved me away from him because, like the first day, because they were talking. And I'm like, Cohen, you're going to end up looking like your choices. You're going to look like your shadow, like whatever is shadowing over you. I was like, so let's get this ball rolling. And you looking like you made glorious decisions.
Yeah. Well, leaders go, old expression, and everybody knows that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Yes.
There's that idea that the person you're following, whether that be a parent or a grandparent or a pastor or a spiritual leader, mentor, whatever it is, the person you're following can only take you so far. There will come a moment when you come out from underneath the shadow and you're going to realize that my choices are going to define my life. And so I think I'll say it this Sunday again, since we're already just trampling all over what I'm going to talk about this week. I think the only shadow that you'll ever be eternally safe in is Jesus's.
Yes.
Like that's the only shadow you can stay in forever.
Yeah.
The beauty of that is not, however, that my character doesn't matter or that I'm not expected to make better choices. The beauty of that is that even in my brokenness, I'm covered by what he's already done. And so I think that's a powerful idea. And yet that never abdicates our responsibility to become the kind of people who look at Jesus and say, I'm in your shadow, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to become like you. That doesn't mean that I just want the goodies without the effort. Like I don't have to earn this salvation, but that thing that you did on the cross, that love that you gave me first, that should create effort. Not earning, but effort.
Yeah.
And so, that coming out of the shadows, and we all deal with that at some point, even at a job. Like if you're, they literally call it shadowing someone when you're learning something new. Like that is the language of the business world that okay, you're going to shadow with them for 3 days. But the understanding is that shadow is going to go away and you're going to have to take up the reins at some point. And so Lot is in that cycle. And so what we see of Lot's life not only tells us about Lot, but it tells us about who Abram was as well.
Yeah. I think even if we think of like what shadows that we're casting, I remember one time when I was little, and this is a horrible, funny story. It's rather stupid.
No,
actually.
People are going to start tuning in just for these.
Just for my
when Abram was
stories.
a kid stories. So
I got scared of my shadow one time. It scared the blazes out of me, but I'm a pretty jumpy person anyways. And I had thought that somebody was outside, but it was my shadow on the carport. And even Sunday, and then when I had listened to the pre-recording, I had thought like Peter Pan with the shadow and stuff, but I had thought of that moment of me being scared of my shadow. And when you were talking about, because Lot was walking in the shadow of who is chasing God, I thought, would I be scared of the shadow that I'm casting? Like, would I be, like what kind of, if I could step back, like Peter Pan and see my shadow afar, like what would I see that my shadow is casting? Would it bother me or how would it draw me? Like I hope that both ways would draw me closer to the Lord, but what would I see is happening with that?
And that's a great point. Honestly, that's a great statement. And it's a sidebar because if you're a pastor in here, I would encourage you. What she said a second ago might not have made sense. She said she listened to the pre-recording, and something that I do almost every week, is I will record a draft of the sermon that I'm going to preach on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, and then I'll send it to her. And there's a couple people that I send it to, and I get feedback on that. What made sense? What didn't make sense? Is there an obvious area of improvement? In generally it's always too long. So I'm asking like, where can I cut? How can I trim the recording? So like Sunday is about the 5th time that I have preached whatever I'm preaching. By the time I stand in front of people, I'm not just, and I'm relying on the Holy Spirit all through the week, not just in that moment. I'm trying to be a good steward of all that he's giving me. So that's when she said that. I don't think we've talked about that, but that is something that I do. I've done it for years now. It helps me. Also, I walk up with more confidence. So what she's saying is that, but that idea that if I could see my shadow, would I be afraid of it, or would I be blessed to know that that's what people are walking? That's a great visual image of sort of this part of the story and what's going on.
And I don't think Abraham was scared of the shadow that he was casting. And maybe he understood where he messed up with Egypt and going and, being like, Sarah's my sister, but
Yes.
Anyway, I don't know.
Sarah's my sister? Yeah, that's, I'm sure that's how he said it. It's like, oops, I didn't know. Like, yeah.
But I just think, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just think it's a good, when you look back on your life, when you look back on the things that you've casted, there's either going to be regret or, okay, I could have done some things better, but okay, I chased after God.
Yeah.
And I think if we're chasing after God, no matter the mishaps that we have, the walks to Egypt or whatever, that if we can say we pursued the Lord, then I think our shadow is safe.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, and again, that's always going to be a sort of a rocky journey.
Yeah,
I mean, that will never be something that is not without failure.
Yeah.
Like, and I used a double negative there, but like that idea that I know that there are moments in my life from this point until I see Jesus face to face when I'm not going to get it right.
Yeah.
And that's not a defeatist mentality. That's not a prophecy that I'm speaking over myself. So I have to fall. I just know humanity well enough, and I know myself well enough to know that that's going to happen. So if the storyline of my life is consumed with pursuing the presence of God, then regardless of the ups and downs, and I think that is probably something that Christians must hear this over and over again. I think we would be honest if we were asked and pinned to the wall and said, what is your opinion? But we have to be honest about this idea that the Christian life is not like a graph that's always up and to the right. It's not always, I'm just constantly growing, the business is booming all the time. Like, it is always up and down and up and down. But when you zoom out far enough, you start to realize and see that, I have been making progress. Even in the dips and valleys, progress is being made. And I think
for sure.
that idea, Abram is settle, like from the end of chapter 11, to leave a place where you've been settling for less than best and say, I'll go somewhere I've never been before because God said it. That marks his life in a way that Egypt can't take away, the drama with Hagar and Ishmael can't take away, the second trip to Egypt can't this idea. He said yes to God. That did not mean that he was never going to stumble in that yes, but it meant that yes was always going to be the far focus of his life, and it was always going to be what he was actually pursuing.
Yeah.
That storyline matters.
He was a sojourner pursuing Jesus.
Constantly.
Yeah.
I actually was reading this morning, and they brought up, and I meant the lady's name. She wrote a book back in like 2008 about free range kids. So
chickens?
Free range kids. I think that's the name of the book. If I'm Lenore is her first name. Her last name escapes me. But anyway, maybe I'll put it at the bottom of the screen after the recording so that you can know what it is. But she talked about this idea that the perception that our children are in more danger now than they were 30, 40, 50 years ago is actually false.
Oh, yeah.
When you look at when you look at the numbers of abuse, abduction, all those things that we're so afraid of, the numbers were almost literally the same.
There's no social media.
Right.
To let us know what's going on.
The awareness was what was different, not the actual danger and threat. And so part of what she said was like, I should be able to leave my kid at this point in time in the middle of Manhattan and him be fine, just like I could 40 years ago. Like, and so, oh man, people gave her grief. Like, you're a bad parent, you won Worst Parent of the Year award, and she was a professor, if I'm not mistaken, or she was writing for the New York or something like that.
Yeah. But
she turned it into a book. But what was fascinating and what I was reading this morning was not her book, it was somebody else writing about it.
Yeah.
But he talked about this idea that the way that we actually live our life has to do with the storyline that we choose to believe.
That's really
so
good. If
the storyline of my life is the world is about as safe as it's ever been, then I will not overprotect my kids at the expense of their development. If the storyline I choose and the narrative I choose is that my kids are always in danger and I've got a helicopter over them and I've got to constantly be there just in case, then I will choose a certain kind of life for them. And I think pulling that back out, as I was pondering that this morning, as I was reading it, I think the question matters. Like, even if you go to Philippians chapter 1, Paul says that I am in chains and people have preached to make my chains heavier. And yet what I see, the storyline I choose to adopt in that moment is not a storyline of oppression or imprisonment or persecution. It's that, man, when they press me, God is known more. Jesus' name is known more. And I just thought, like, what an amazing storyline. Abram has chosen the storyline of his life to say, pursuing the presence of God will be absolutely everything to me, which means even when I stumble and fall, prosperity still seems to fall into my arms. Even when I have to repent and walk back to the land that I departed from before I should have, I still find that God's there at the altar with me. Lot's coming out from underneath the shadows reveals the storyline that Lot has chosen to believe is not one of pursuing God, but it's one of just enjoying the blessings of somebody else's pursuit, which is why Lot goes and makes his tents near Sodom, because he's, and again, I'll talk about this week, but you've already opened the hatch, so it's fine. But like,
I think really good.
The storyline of their lives may very well be the thing that's so different about them, which then reveals the trajectory that each of them are taking, right? And so I think that's, when I'm teaching this and preaching this, when I'm pondering and praying through this, like, what is the storyline of life that I'm adopting? Because there's two ways to see every story.
Yeah, always. I'm
either incarcerated or I'm a missionary in a way that I never could have expected. My kids are either hyper in danger or hyper not in danger, and I will choose the storyline. Even if the numbers are the same, I'm choosing the narrative that I live my life under. So I do think that, and I know I talked about spiders on Sunday morning as well, which you don't love, but no. I don't know if there's a transition into that. We've only got a couple more minutes here, but I talked about smashing spiders.
Yeah, impressing them, and like what came out was a bunch of babies of the mama spider.
You've seen these mother spiders, right?
Yes, we don't need graphics
with all the babies standing on their back.
We don't need the visual. Let's go back to Peter Pan.
No, I like this.
But how they spew out all the little spiders get going, and you were talking about how when we're pressed and we're pushed, that we're not cracking, that we're spewing out the glory of God.
But how much of that is the storyline we're choosing to live under?
Exactly.
Like if every time I come to a test or a trial or a tribulation, it's just, God's left me in the world's a terrible place. Like if that's the storyline I choose to live under, then I will act and behave a certain way, which I think creates the kind of shadow that I look back on and say, man, I wish I'd done better. Yeah,
I wish I would have walked in joy. I wish I would have not walked in complaint. I 100%. Wish I would have walked in peace, because that's what we should be spewing out, like 100%. The fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Like we should be spewing out those things when we're pushed, and if not, if we're spewing out other things, then maybe we're not walking in the fruit either.
Well, and you find out what's on the inside when you crush the outside. The olive turns into oil, the grape turns into wine. Like all those images that are really prevalent throughout the scriptures are absolutely present here too, just in a more poetic way, that when you press Abram's life, he comes back to the land of promise and back to an altar. Yes. When you press Lot's life, he goes to the well-watered plains right next to the city of Sodom. Mm-hmm. And I think, so both of them have the same opportunities. Yeah. Both of them have the choice to do the right thing. But when they're pressed, you find out what storyline they're living under. When Paul is pressed, you find out what storyline he's living under. When the Philippian church is pressed, you find out what storyline they're living under. And so I think somehow, and I probably won't communicate all of that on Sunday, so I won't go into that. So this is my chance to it's a preemptive strike. I get to say the things I won't say this coming Sunday, right? Yeah. But I do think that matters. Yeah, and
for sure.
Even as a pastor, even as a teacher, as a minister, am I giving people a better storyline in the middle of the moments of their trial, or am I just contributing to the mass chaos that's generated by cable news, by all the negative reporting, by how terrible the world is? Like, what am I doing? And I think that as a pastor, I want to lead people into the kind of pastures where there's a better storyline that they can endure their tests under. So those tests reveal a great shadow, not a place of exposure and weakness, I guess.
Yeah, that's good. So, Fox News is not in the waters. Lead me beside still waters.
No, it is not. It is not. That is not a still field or still waters. Yeah, green pasture or still water. Yeah.
So I love that.
Anything else for Sunday?
No, I think
we've got about 2 minutes left.
I think that it puts me on time crunch.
Yes, I will.
I think that, the way that you just captured and the intro of the shadow, and then being able to expound on it in this episode 4 of the podcast. You know, like I think it's going to make so much more sense for what God has you to say on this coming Sunday. And I think I think it leads, and I think that if we see Lot in a different manner than just Sodom and Gomorrah, if we're seeing his character leading up to those moments, I think it opens up a bigger picture, because the only thing that we've ever placed him in is Sodom and Gomorrah and his wife as a pillar of salt, you know, but what about his character that led up to all that?
Yeah.
Like, how do you think he got there?
Yeah.
You know, and so I think it's really good of how you're opening up the door and you're diving into not just Abram, but how his family contrasted together.
Well, and I think I had mentioned a little bit too, Genesis 13 is not a passage I would ever just preach.
Yeah.
And so like
pull this
this,
out of the hat.
this would be an easy one just to skip over and say, this is how Lot got to Sodom, and this is how the covenant was renewed with Abraham by the end of the chapter. But I think that's where preaching and teaching through books of the Bible, through lives and stories, verse by verse, chapter by chapter, you wind up in these places that you didn't think was going to be as valuable as it was. But the scriptures are that way.
Yeah, and our lives are that way. We don't just get to preach the mountaintops or the valleys. Like, there was things that happened upstream. There were things that happened 100%. Downstream. You know, like, there's things that happen in the middle that bring us to those points, and those points have got to be discussed in some manner.
Yeah. Well, and maybe the greatest place of testimony for Christians is not just the big moment when something big happened, but it's learning to recognize in the mundane season how faithful God was, or how God steered my life. Like, and maybe some of teaching through these chapters that people would generally just skim. Yeah. Hopefully what that's doing is generating an awareness in people's lives to pay attention to the places they wouldn't have seen.
To the in-between.
So, because I mean, if every day is a testimony of God's faithfulness, how many testimonies am I missing because I'm waiting on the big mountaintop moments instead of watching the journey and with eyes that have been sort of conditioned by grace. And so I do think that matters absolutely. And so, and you know, I will say, I'll close with this. So we dropped my daughter off at college on Saturday before Sunday, and like all the emotional mess that was going on was more than enough. Like it was I bet. My just inside, I was in turmoil through worship. I played guitar during worship, just was struggling to maintain like focus. And those are moments that absolutely happen. Those, like, life happens to preachers too. Yeah. And sometimes I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing in those moments, but sometimes it's just hard. Like the compartment gets so full that it just dumps over into the other side, and you cannot kind of stay away from it. And so that was that moment. And I think part of the reason the intro was so hard for me was because of that. Like, there was just this, it was a flood. There was just a floodplain that had been created in my mind and in my heart. And God has grace for those moments too. And He gave me another week to really restart this and reboot this, and which I'm grateful for. But also, I think what was said is what was said. Yeah,
and even in the word, and I know that we have to go, but even in the word that was given out before you started preaching, he was talking about the pressing of Him was for His glory. Like, I went back and I listened to it like 3 or 4 times.
There was a message in tongues that was given and interpreted in the service.
And I went back and listened to it 3 or 4 times, and he was just talking about the pressing of Him is for His glory, and what's being pressed and what's coming out. And I just thought it was so beautiful how, like, you literally started talking about that. And I mean, the Holy Spirit obviously is, He knows better than we do. And so in those moments, in those compartmentalized moments when we feel like the world is pressing us, but like when Jesus presses us, it's so much more beautiful.
Yes, it is.
And He helps our compartments.
Yes, He does. And He's good at it.
Yeah,
He's
He
good
is.
at it. All right.
Yes.
Episode 4 in the books. We'll come back to Genesis 13 next week and talk about whatever, the rest of this stuff, the stuff that Amber has not already spoilered you on.
Sorry.
But nonetheless, it's all good. Thank you for watching, and
thank you.
Grateful every time. And hopefully we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to the Low Capacity Leader Podcast. If you'd like to know more information about Fairforest Church of God in Spartanburg, South Carolina, you can find us on all social media platforms. And if you don't want to know more about us, that's okay too.